Well, I've been asked a number of questions about gardening lately on my socials, so I thought I'd take an opportunity today to share my experience and give you some answers. And the lovely John is going to fire some questions at me.
First up, we had a question on when to prune Old English roses.
Well, basically, you would prune old. You prune old English roses pretty much the same way as you prune most floribundas or hybrid teas. So wait till late winter, early spring, and then you can reduce the plants down by about 1/3 to 2/3. And what you need to do is look for various things. So any branches that are growing inwards that are rubbing or scraping, you need to remove those back to the stem. Any branches that are diseased or damaged, again, remove back to the stem. And what you want to create is like an open center to the rose so the air and the light can get into the center. You want a nice branch structure, half a dozen or so good strong stems facing outwards, and prune them down to an outward facing bud. That way that bud will grow outwards towards the light, not inwards towards the rose as well. And sometimes they suggest pruning that cut at a 45-degree angle, so any rain or moisture runs off the top of the stem and prevents any dieback going down into the stem or diseases developing. So if you do that, as I say, late winter, mid-spring, by the end of March, middle of April, they'll reshoot really, really nicely and flower for you the same year. And of course, at that same time as well, if you want to, you can hoe in or lightly dig in some rose fertilizer around the base as well to give them an extra boost to get them going for summer. Hold on a minute, I thought you was going to stop.
Next question, Adam. Can I take cuttings from my spotted laurel?
Yeah, you definitely can. Spotted laurel is a Cuba japonica or Japanese laurel. There's a couple of ways you can take cuttings from that. First of all, you can take what's called semi-ripe cuttings in late summer. So before the wood goes really, really hard, you can take those stems, find a stem that hasn't got berries or hasn't flowered, take a piece of stem about kind of 8 inches tall, prune the top off at a 45-degree angle, just above a leaf joint, prune again horizontally, just below a leaf joint at the lower end. That way you can tell the top of the cutting from the bottom of the cutting, and then push that cutting about halfway into some really gravelly, well-drained, sandy compost in a pot. Just put it around the edge of the pot. If you're going to take a few cuttings, that's where you get the best drainage and the most warmth penetrating through into the pot. And just leave those cuttings outside. Make sure they don't freeze, brick solid during the winter, but you can just leave them outside somewhere for the winter in a sheltered, bright spot. And hopefully by late spring, summer the following year, they'll start to put down roots. At that point, you can transplant them into a bigger pot, grow them on before eventually planting them outside, or you can take cuttings through a process known as layering. So that involves looking for a stem towards the bottom part of the laurel that you can actually bend and place down onto the soil. If you can put that stem right down onto the soil, sometimes you can just make a little nick in the stem below, again, a leaf joint, and then put a brick or something heavy or use a pin to pin that cutting down so it makes contact with the soil. Put a little bit of soil over the top of it and then just wait. And what will happen is at the point where it touches the ground, it will eventually produce roots that will penetrate down into the ground and it will become a plant in its own right. And at that point, you can cut it away from the parent plant and transplant it. Or what you could do, rather than actually get it to grow directly into the ground, you could place a flower pot underneath it, drop down into the ground with that layer over the top. That way it will root down into the pot. Then you can cut it away from the parent and you've got a plant already grown on in a pot that you can transplant and grow on somewhere else.
That's brilliant, thank you. Adam, can you recommend any bulbs or perennials that do really well in shade, please?
Yeah, there's actually quite a lot of choices, really. In my own garden, just off to the side where I'm pointing, I've got a north-facing border that's really, really shady. And I've got a number of bulbs that do well in there. Bluebells, snowdrops, aranthis, things like cyclamen, not strictly a bulb, but those kind of plants do well in shade. So if you think of all the bulbs that naturally grow in woodland kind of areas, trilliums, for example, are another good example that will grow in shady areas. They like that cool, damp, moist soil. Corydalis is another one you could try and grow as well. You can get the blue flowered or the yellow flowered. And if you're thinking about perennials, phlox do particularly well in shade. Actaea is another one. Foxgloves, things like primulas, hostas. There's quite a large range, actually, more than you'd imagine, that will actually grow in shady borders. And going back to the bulbs, in spring, I even have loads of daffodils that do quite well in that border. So don't be kind of put off by growing things in a shady border. There's a lot more plants, bulbs, flowers and shrubs you can grow in shade than you'd actually imagine.
Another question here that's actually quite topical, bearing in mind we've had the first frost this morning, is about protecting olives and when is best to do it and should you need to do it? Those sort of questions I think the lady was asking.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with olives is olives are hardy down to -10 degrees centigrade. So generally they get through most British winters, no problem at all. Down in this part of the country, I mean, I'll be honest, if you're in northern parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, perhaps higher parts of Wales and so on, I understand. You can get temperatures a lot colder than that. In fact, this morning or tomorrow morning, they're predicting a -10 in the Highland areas of Scotland. So you can't necessarily grow olives in that part of the world. But generally, most parts of the UK, you can grow olives. You don't need to protect them during most winters. If we're going to get a particularly harsh winter, then yeah, you could certainly use fleece, horticultural fleece to put around your plant. And having said what I just said, if you've got smaller plants, I would definitely protect them, even if it only goes down to -4, -5. Give them a little bit of protection, because like any plants really, olives get tougher the bigger they get. And also somebody mentioned that their olives lost all their leaves. Now, this isn't necessarily down to very, very cold weather. Sometimes olives can get something called peacock spot. And you know that because you see these little kind of markings on the leaves of your olive tree that look like those eye shapes on the feathers of peacocks. It's like a fungal disease that can defoliate olive trees. And you can treat that with copper fungicide a couple of times a year. And that will actually kind of stop that fungal infection developing and stop your olive from actually defoliating. And if you want to give your olive the best chance in your garden, grow it in the sunniest, warmest, most sheltered spot you can imagine. And if you think olive trees thrive down in the Mediterranean, if you can kind of recreate that Mediterranean environment for them, that's when they're going to be really happy. That's where they're going to grow very, very well. And in fact, in recent years, I've seen olive trees getting bigger and bigger in the UK. Both my mother and mother-in-law have got huge olive trees that have thrived, that flower, that have got olives, not edible, but ornamental. So generally your olive won't defoliate, but also do remember, late winter, early spring into early summer, it will shed a lot of its old leaves before it produces new leaves. Although they're evergreen, obviously the same leaves can't stay on that tree forever and ever and ever. So in spring, when the tree produces new fresh leaves, what it will do, it will shed or reject those older leaves, those damaged leaves, those diseased leaves, and then the new leaves will come through. So don't worry about it. Most winters, olives will be absolutely fine. Just look out for that peacock spot. Keep them in that warm, dry, sunny spot, and you should be able to get olives to grow year after year after year in the UK.
Well, that's brilliant. There's lots of stuff there to unpack. As I say, very, very topical at the moment. Another topical question here in the UK is about flooded gardens. Now, a lady was saying her garden's got flooded recently and she's worried that the plants might not survive.
Yeah, we recently had a storm, Claudia, depending on where you come from. But yeah, we recently had a storm where lots of gardens got flooded in Monmouthshire. Terrible, terrible floods there, rather sadly. And people have contacted me to say their gardens have been inundated. Now, don't panic. It looks awful just after the flood water recedes, but providing the flood water is fresh water from a river and not salt water from inundation from the sea, it'll be fine. Your garden will look waterlogged. It'll look really, really sad. But providing the flood water drains away within 3 or 4 days, a week, most plants will be absolutely fine. If it's going to stay there for week after week after week, yeah, some plants will suffer. But generally, floodwaters like we've had recently recede quite quickly. And if your floodwater's hanging around a little bit, you can always try and dig some drainage channels to kind of drain that water away from your garden, perhaps spike the soil and loosen it to help the water drain through if the soil's a bit compacted. But don't panic. It will look sad through the winter, but come the spring, when the weather warms up, when the temperatures warm up and the ground starts to dry out, you'll be amazed how resilient plants are. And even those really bedraggled, sad-looking plants that were deluged and inundated by that floodwater, most of them, if not all of them, will come back in the spring.
Next question. Why do I need to remove fallen leaves from my lawn, please?
This is a question I get quite a lot. And you know what? Kind of the answer has changed over the years, because historically, people have always said, yeah, if leaves fall down on the lawn, you need to remove those leaves straight away, rake them off, blow them off. And that is true to an extent, because if you leave a really thick layer of wet, heavy leaves on your lawn for a long period of time, those leaves exclude the light, they stop the grass drying out, so the grass goes yellow. It can increase the risk of fungal diseases, it prevents good drainage, it stops the grass drying out, so it can be detrimental to grass. But in recent years, another way of dealing with that is, rather than raking or blowing all those leaves off, what a lot of people do now, including us, is we actually mulch those leaves. We run up and down over the top of the leaves with a lawnmower on a nice high cut. And what that will do is that will shred the leaves really, really fine, and go up and down 2 or 3 times and just leave those shredded leaves on the lawn. That way they will let the light through. They won't kind of completely obscure the grass, but what will happen is they will break down and they will add organic material to the soil. The worms, the wind, the rain, the frost will break those leaves down. It'll improve the soil quality, it'll improve the soil bacteria, and it's just a really, really good way of using those leaves rather than kind of wasting time bagging them up or taking them off to the compost heap. So try that method instead, and that way, you know, it saves all that hassle of raking them, and you can use all those leaves as a beneficial product for your lawn rather than something that's going to harm the grass.
One last question, Adam. What are your top 5 plants for autumn interest?
Top 5 plants for autumn interest. Well, actually, I'm looking at some at the corner of my eye. Actually, I've got some shrubs, or they can become small trees, called parottias, that have the most beautiful autumn coloured foliage. Ironwood, I think, is another name for them. They're really, really colourful in autumn. Things like rhubarb or staghorn. That's another fantastic autumn flowering shrub that the leaves turn an incredible kind of red and orange and all kind of different colours. Different types of cherry trees as well, and acers. They all have incredible flower colour. That's 4 of them. And I think also, not so much autumn, but winter. It's nice to have winter flowering plants, and I think witch hazel has got to be one of my favourite ones there as well.
That was a bit unfair because you didn't know what that last question
I did not. No, that was yeah.
So you did that remarkably. That's brilliant. Okay, Adam, last word to you.
Well, yeah. So thanks for all the questions. Any more questions? Always ask. Drop some comments, and we'll be able to answer them for you. Whenever you want to ask, basically.